Hello, this is David.
And this is Salome.
And welcome to the SOSN podcast. And for this week, we actually have ourselves a special guest star.
Woo!
Yeah, today I would like to introduce everyone to Philip Reed, who is the writer, blogger from Noiseless Chatter, and he's here to promote his book about Resident Evil. Phil, how's it going?
It's going well, yes. Buy my book about Resident Evil.
Buy my
That's
book.
the end of the interview. Thank you, Phil, for joining us.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
But seriously though, that we have read the book and have to say that it is one of the best books I've read when it comes to video games. That it isn't just because I know that we were concerned when reading the book about maybe this is just going to be a book about like somebody just playing the video game and
play by play.
Yeah, then you go, like watching a long play, but instead you see right out. I go this way, I go that way, but it's actually much more than that.
Yeah, I'll say as someone, and I'm not shy to say, I'm someone who loses interest extremely easily, and I'm never shy to say it. But this one, it's one where it was a very easy read in the sense that I was just so engulfed in what you were saying, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and it was a lot. You went a lot more deeper than I thought you would, and it was very, very cool. So it's I'm actually very excited to talk about the book. Mm-hmm. So, and I really actually want to play the game, honestly. But first, let's just start with the most obvious question: why Resident Evil?
Yeah, it's a valid question. The fact of the matter is, if you sat me down and said, okay, what are 50 games you could write about? I could easily make a list, but I'm not sure how many of those would actually translate into a readable or engaging narrative. Resident Evil sort of... I'm laughing because I'm about to be rude to it. Resident Evil, my first experience of it was, this game is not very good. I'm angry at this game. I'm not enjoying this game. Take this game away. And now today, however many decades later, my opinion is completely different. So I knew that I would have a story that I could tell, and within that there's the story of how, well, back then I didn't really even like horror, and now I really love it. And I thought it would be kind of nice to weave those threads together. Other games I could probably figure something out, but that one, at least for me, was a pretty natural story to tell.
Because I know, in the book, there was one, to quote you in it, there was a part where you said that I hated it and I couldn't get enough of it. So it's I want you to elaborate a little bit more on that, because from reading the book, yes, you did speak about both sides, about the not so good of the video game, but also its charm of it, Mm-hmm. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The charms I think are easy enough for people to glean, but specifically, the reason I didn't like it, to be brutally honest about myself, is that I wasn't engaging with it on its terms. I was engaging with it on my terms, and I had learned those terms from Super Mario Brothers and Legend of Zelda and other Capcom things like Mega Man that I loved and still love. There's an experience that those games provided, and I was 100% on board with it. And then Resident Evil came and did not provide anything like those experiences, and I was closed off to it, pretty much like I was to horror in general. I know you're doing something. I believe you. I'm sure you think this is wonderful. I have zero interest, and that's completely on me. And I hope that at least comes across in the book. But yeah, I was unwilling to engage.
Mm-hmm. And so when you were playing Resident Evil, because as you just mentioned that you weren't really into the horror genre, but then would you say that Resident Evil helped open the door to horror genre, and not just in regards to video games, but to, now I want to check out, movies, comic books, maybe even a television show or two that dives into it?
Yes, to be totally bluntly honest about it, I think that was the turning point. It's absolutely nothing that I recognized at the time. It's only looking back that this is the work of horror that straddled the line for me. I encountered it when I didn't care about it. I didn't care for it. I wanted nothing to do with it. And it ended up being something that I could not stop thinking about and reflecting on over the years. So maybe turning point implies something a little quicker than what really happened. But I believe that was sort of the transitional piece of media for me.
Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to your relationship with horror, can you recall like any specific, besides Resident Evil, like any other, material in regards to the horror genre that left an impact on you? Or maybe even something that you recall as a kid. They were like, hey, what's that? And it just scared you to your bone. And you're like, that's it. I want to stay away from horror.
Yeah, because it's interesting because in your book, you really do talk about how you did hate horror at one point, like when you were younger. And pretty much now that's really what you really dive deep into, you know? Like you see a lot of horror movies, look at video games and stuff like that. So what was that turning point for you?
It's really funny. I think at some point this was actually in a draft of the book. I don't think I finished. I realized I was digressing, so I got rid of it. I don't think I ever actually finished writing it properly. But when I was a really young kid, you'll know better than me, David. I'm sure you can rattle off the year. I don't remember the year. But whenever Little Shop of Horrors came out,
yes, 1986.
The remake.
Yeah, 86. Yeah, when I was like,
I knew it.
Yeah.
Of course, David knows. Come on now.
So I would have been 5, little kid, and it had to be right around that time. Someone gave me for my birthday or for Christmas a bank, that you put your pennies in, and it was in the shape of Audrey 2.
Oh.
And yeah, it was kind of cool. Like, it was in a pot and it was facing upward, and you would put the coin on its teeth, and there was like a little thing that detected it, and then the plant would open its mouth and like chew and eat the coin. And that's fine in my mind. Wow, this is neat. It's a machine. And I connected it in my brain to the piranha plants from Super Mario. And like, it was something I recognized. Yeah. And then I saw, at some point, I finally saw the movie, and it scared the hell out of me. And I didn't want the bank anymore. Like, I liked it, and I had this attachment, and I had like reasons I could appreciate it until I saw where this thing came from, and I wanted it out of my life.
That's adorable.
But it's so funny though, because like you talk about the progression.
It is adorable. Like looking back, it is adorable because it wasn't Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like this was something that it's really not that scary.
Mm-hmm.
The most adorable thing ever, though.
Well, I mean, I've got two because of what mine was when it came to the horror genre. One, when I was a kid, and it's even mentioned in the book, the Thriller music video. It's not the zombies; it's the part when Michael turns into a werewolf. That's the part that always gets me when his eyes turn yellow, and he's like, I think he says like "go away" or something. And even when I watched behind the scenes of it, I always got freaked out. I'd look behind, like I would hide behind the chair, and they show clips from American Werewolf in London, and that is, in my opinion, the scariest werewolf. And of course, me as a kid, I'm like, that's it, I'm done.
I wonder how many people had that music video be like their introduction, or like kind of solidify their love or hatred for horror movies, because it's kind of funny that you mentioned that as you got older, you ended up loving horror movies. For some reason, for me, it kind of became the opposite, because when I was younger, and Thriller was one of those first introductions for me to like really loving horror movies. The older I got, the more of a scaredy cat I became, and the more I refused to watch horror movies as someone who loves horror movies. But I'm not going to lie, because actually, we'll dive more when we start talking about your book, but when I found out that Resident Evil, because one, I thought it was a movie first before a video game. I didn't know.
Oh, no. I'm sorry to hear that.
I literally knew nothing, because the thing is, here's the thing, though. The one thing I hate with a passion is zombies. Like one, they do freak me out, but two, for some reason in my mind, I just could not get behind the idea of zombies. So when we ended up reading your book, David's like, you know what, I need to show you some zombie movies. Let me show you what this game's really about. It showed me like a run through of the video game.
Yeah, long play, yeah.
I'm not going to lie, I actually really want to dive more into zombies now, because it actually kind of got me very interesting when we saw...
It was Night of the Living Dead.
Night of the Living Dead, yeah. Like, that movie, I just stayed like, what the actual fuck? Is there more to this, please? Because
I'm very curious to hear your opinion on that. Not to jump ahead, but, like, having heard that, yes, I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I have opinions.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways.
And also the second movie that scared the bejesus out of me was when, in Ghostbusters 2, when Fagman and Figo combine, and he creates this weird, Figgy, you've been a bad monkey, and he's got this weird face, and here's the thing, that led to an argument between my mom and my dad, because he took us to see it in theaters when we were just little babies, and we were crying, and my mom's like, you took them to see that?
Oh my god, that's hilarious. I do remember, it wasn't really like terrifying to me, but as a kid, the first Ghostbusters film with the librarian ghost at the very beginning, And I stand by it. That I remember thinking, wow, this is really creepy. This is spooky. I don't really remember having that with the second film, but yeah, certainly that bit was a little unnerving.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that funny though? Where it's like if you think about, because you also you dive into it in the book when you talk about how the camp factor and such, and how things have sort of changed stuff, and how maybe things that were scary back then. You quote from Treehouse of Horror about the Raven. Well, things were maybe they were scared 150 years ago. Well, what about Friday the 13th Part 1? That was just 10 years ago. Now it's pretty tame. But it's so funny that we laugh about it, but back then. Well, Jesus, we were terrified of those things.
It's really interesting, the evolution of horror in general, of just what's considered scary now. And like you just said, 10 years from now, whatever we thought was scary now, we'll probably just be like, look at this bullshit. Like, what the fuck? But so like, this is a perfect segue into your book, because there was a lot of mention about cinematic terms and describing how the game is, particularly about like fixed camera angles and stuff like that. I know that you did talk to, I'm going to butcher his last name, Roy Bassav?
Bassav? Oh, no, it was a quote from the Miami Herald. Yeah.
David, you go ahead and talk about that.
What happened was that he assumed that the camera angles were hidden cameras placed around the mansion. And this is one of the, I don't know if this was the first example of it, but from what I can recall, this is the first example of a video game review talking in terms of cinema, about where the camera is being placed in the game and how it's influence on the game itself.
I have two things to say about that. One is a little bit of behind-the-scenes trivia that it just occurred to me again. That specific review almost wasn't in the book. We ended up finding that a little later in the process because we had quoted a different review, which thematically and contextually, it fit perfectly, the flow of the chapter, and it went out to the proofreaders, and the proofreaders provided their feedback, of course. And for that specific review, someone said, I'm not going to mention a name, but someone said, I don't know if you guys realize this, but this guy is like a really big white supremacist now, and he won't shut up about genocide. And
that's not funny.
So no, we didn't know that. So we cut that out. We found this review instead, which, in a way, it kind of filled in that same gap, but it also added this element, which I thought was really fascinating in itself, because I think it would be difficult for anyone to play the original Resident Evil and not get a sense that they're going for some kind of cinematic approach. Mm-hmm. But that specific, the mental bridging that reviewer did, where he saw the game and he saw how it was presented, and in his mind, with no evidence in the game whatsoever, in his mind, he figured, well, this is how the movie must have been shot. This must be security camera footage. Mm-hmm. And he seemingly just arrived at that conclusion and stuck with it. He didn't question it. He didn't say, oh, that's stupid, I won't put that. And the fact that he didn't question it, the fact that it made it to the final draft at least, it's very telling to me. And I think it's very interesting that game managed to have that kind of impact on the budding games criticism that was out there. Because as you saw in the rest of that chapter, games criticism was nothing. People would talk about their apartment, and they talk about the boot that came with the game, and it was it's like, it's fun and funny to look back at that. But here was somebody who was genuinely trying to understand, and he may have gotten it wrong, but he got it wrong in a really fascinating way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because like me and David were talking about that just like the way that the game was constructed, I guess, for lack of better terms. Like, and you also talked about it too, that it felt like a director was pointing the camera of only what he wanted you to see at that moment. So it mentioned, like, it reminded us of like more contemporary movies like the Blair Witch Project with like obstruction of view. You're only able to see what the person holding the camera is able to see, like when they're running or whatever. You can't see where you naturally, like if let's say you're running away from something, you naturally want to turn around to see how far you're away, right? Mm-hmm. But you can't see because of whoever's holding the camera, so you're stuck just seeing that. Or like Paranormal Activity with a fixed camera, you could only see that. So it's like, do you feel that this adds to the charm of the Resident Evil franchise, or to the game, or to its success, or?
Yes, to the game, and I think to its success. Whether people maybe realize that consciously or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I'm putting that caveat out there is because I remember vividly playing that as a kid, and the camera isn't showing me what I want to see. So I walk into a room, and maybe the camera's looking flat at me. I can't see what is anywhere else in this room. I just see me standing by a door, and all I want is to see what's here. Is there a trap? Is there a monster? Mm-hmm. Maybe I hear moaning or shuffling, and I can't see where it's coming from. Mm-hmm. And that frustrated me and irritated me as a kid, but that's, again, because I was approaching it as like a Super Mario Brothers kind of thing. That Super Mario would never make you run blindly into something. It'll give you a chance to react. That's only fair. In this game, the quote-unquote director is not interested in fairness. That's not what the point of this experience is. The point is, you're supposed to be scared. You're supposed to walk into that room and still not know if you're safe. And it's tremendously effective at that. I don't know. No, I'll take that back. I do actually know that a lot of people look back on the first game and they complain about the fixed camera angles and the clunky controls. And I do get that. But at the same time, I don't know if they realize that might actually be part of why it worked so well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking of in regards to it is, especially after watching The Thing again and how John Carpenter films in scope. Obviously in this case, it wasn't scope. It was more, it was full screen, obviously. We haven't gone into HD gaming yet. But what they did was, in the usage of space in particular, or how... The one thing I also noticed was like these shots in John Carpenter's movie where it would linger on a hallway, something as innocuous as a hallway or a door, and how intimidating and suspenseful it is. And I think about the load screens in the game and how the door, like you walking down the stairs or the door opens and it's like you don't know what's on the other side, and it's the reason why it's there is because it's loading to take you into the next room.
It drags it out and it makes you even more anxious.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God. Honestly, I have not played the game yet. I've only seen, what people post on YouTube. I, myself, was already getting anxious. We live in an era where it's we want instant satisfaction. Just get it, But this is no, we're going to linger here. We're going to drag it out and make you feel the agony. And it's just oh my God. Even now I'm just sweating. My hands are sweating. It makes me anxious.
And to follow up with your knowledge of the game and the development, how much of that is in regards to hardware limitations, or did they deliberately decide, okay, we're going to use this to our advantage, these load screens and these load screen times and such?
It's okay. I can't confirm this for sure. I would, however, bet my life savings, all $600, that it was completely born of hardware limitations, and they just they found an interesting way to present it. And I don't know if you guys saw the articles going around or anything fairly recently. Evidently, the PlayStation 5, people are saying it won't have any load times. It's going to be instantaneous, and that is very correct or not. In theory, that's a very nice thing. Load times are just wasted time. You sit with a controller in your hand doing nothing. But it immediately made me think of things like Resident Evil and the most recent Spider-Man game. For those load times, he's sitting on a subway with other people, and they're reacting because Spider-Man is on a subway. And it's this really cool just little thing to give somebody, because we have to have a load screen. Let's make it work somehow. In Spider-Man, maybe it's going to be silly. In Resident Evil, it's going to really amp up the tension, because you just want this fucking door to open so that you know if you're going into danger or away from it. And when you lose, I don't know, when you lose that load screen, a developer isn't even going to ask himself that question. He won't say, what can I put here that's really cool? Because there's nothing there. And I think that's a little bit sad.
Yeah, and the thing, I'm so glad that you mentioned that example of Spider-Man, because it's what I love about that loading screen aspect of it. It in a way, it's character development. You care more.
Yeah.
Let's say you don't know, okay, Spider-Man in a sense of, superhero dresses up a spider, okay. But let's say you're not that familiar with who Peter Parker is, and then you see him in these load times, and you're like, hey, I like how he interacts with the people of New York. It gives a sense of life to it. It makes you care.
Yeah, and it brings you more into the story, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so going into that, I know that when it comes to, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
When you're on the subway train with Peter.
In all fairness, and I told you before we started the interview, I just woke up from a nap. Anyways.
That's okay.
So, like, talking about the charm of Resident Evil and stuff, like, you know, the charm of this game is that you're learning with the protagonist and whoever you're playing in the game. You're learning as we go along, you know, like, you're not thrown into the video game already knowing the background story. You don't know exactly what happened. You're going to be learning by these little, like, diary entries that you find along the way and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And obviously this approach isn't really new. We have movies and books that have done, like H.P. Lovecraft that you mentioned in the book, at Mountains of Madness.
At the Mountains of Madness being his most famous.
I don't got my glasses on. I can't see. Or even as with the movie The Thing, like that we watched last night, that you're not exactly... You don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So,
and essentially from that is that in regards to the effectiveness, and that is, because I look at it when it comes to horror films, that it seems that for the most part that they just want to throw you into the situation, you know, right away. And that's all well and good, you know, that way you take care of exposition, people already know, but there's this sense of, it removes the sense of fun from it where you're learning as the characters are learning. But I guess, you know, that they don't care enough for that. But in the case of Resident Evil, you know, they care, and that adds more to its legacy, that attention to detail.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. It unfolds on two levels. Obviously, like, you do have the story that you occupy, where you're the protagonist, and you learn what's in that room and what's in this room. You learn what happened to this guy. That's your story. Mm-hmm. And beneath that, there's a related but completely separate story that played out without you. And The Thing, John Carpenter's version, does that extraordinarily well. You get both stories, but one of them you get at a remove, where they're translating documents from Norwegian, and they're watching, I think they said it's like 9 hours of VHS footage, and most of it is just, you know, landscapes, and they're just trying to figure out what the hell happened here. And it's funny because Night of the Living Dead, I rewatched that as well, and this time around, I'd never noticed it before, but when Ben comes into the farmhouse and Barbara's already there and she's kind of shell-shocked, he's boarding up the windows or the door, he's boarding up something, and he's talking to her, and you kind of get the sense like he wants this to be not comfortable, I guess, but like he wants her to realize, like, I'm not going to hurt you. So he is telling her this story about what happened to him immediately before coming to the farmhouse. And he found this abandoned vehicle, and he's driving it. He was by a diner, and then there's this gasoline truck, and it was going out of control, and there's 15 zombies chasing after it. And what did we see? We saw Barbara's side, which is, you know, for the most part, standing in a cemetery. That wasn't as exciting as whatever Ben saw. But I think it worked well that we stuck with her for this really kind of quiet and atmospheric introduction. And then we hear about and we can imagine this much more bombastic introduction that we would have seen had we started the film with Ben. And I don't know, that just seemed like the right decision to me. Again, hardware limitations versus budget limitations, that kind of thing. Like, that was I'm sure, born of necessity. But my God, did it work really well.
Yeah, I think it adds a sense, I don't want to say a sense of urgency, but, like, again, lack of better terms, like dread. If you know the story going in, it's like, what is there really to lose? We know what the story is. Here, it feels like we're stuck in the house with them, and we're learning as we go along with, you know, Ben's story, the girl's story, and then the other guy that's stuck in there with his wife.
The Coopers.
Yeah, the Coopers, when they talk about, like, these people are strong. They turned their car around, like, you know, and they had to run away. So it's like you're piecing the pieces together. Like, okay, so are they weak? So they're strong then? Okay, so they eat flesh. All right, and all we have to use the resources only in the house, and that's why I love about when you were talking about the video game as well. That also adds to the charm and the scariness of it. I guess is the fact that because you're not necessarily thrown in there, but it's because, again, you don't know what's going on. You find out as you go along. You have limited resources, and there are consequences if you use up all your resources at once. Yeah, you know.
And that's actually part of this wonderful part of the book where you go into the 9 defining elements of survival horror, and that's the reason why we were thinking about Night of the Living Dead and The Thing, not only to classic, movies, as Resident Evil being a classic video game, but just how those are great examples of survival horror as well, and fit in nicely with Resident Evil.
Yeah, you talk about 9, right?
Go ahead, yeah.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say it's amazing. You said, hey, let's do these 2 films. So I rewatched them. I'd seen them many times, but I rewatched them for this purpose. And through that filter, both of them certainly, but Night of the Living Dead especially played out to me like a survival horror, where they have, Ben's boarding up everything, but there's only so much wood. And then when the older guy comes out of the basement, he says, there's a million weak spots up here. They're making the Molotov cocktails, but there's a limited amount of jars to use. Mm-hmm. They could drive to the place where the National Guard is, but they don't have gas. And everything comes down, sometimes explicitly, not always, but everything comes down to this lack of resources. And in theory, if we use everything correctly and we're smart about this, we can get through. And the horror builds from the fact that you're probably not going to use this stuff effectively. So what the hell are you going to do next?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is when we think about the Thing, and that is that you can argue that the Thing has, maybe more plentiful resources regarding that it's a U.S. military science base, but then once again the scarcity of resources in the sense of they're in Antarctica.
Yeah,
where
are they going?
Yeah, they're isolated from, or as Kurt Russell says in the first 10 minutes of the movie, first goddamn week of winter. It's like,
well, it kind of takes them out. One of the points that you put here, one of the elements is taking them outside of their comfort zone. Well, it's even though they're technically in their comfort zone of they're in their lab, they know that area. Once you throw another element in there, it's like, well, shit, now we don't know what the fuck is going on. We're out of our comfort zone.
Yeah. To them, it takes one mysterious dog, and to them, a bunch of crazy Swedes. No, wait, that's Norwegians.
Yeah. Dude, I was yelling at the TV because I've never seen both of these movies before until this week.
Yes.
I was literally yelling at the TV.
Yeah.
I was like, what? David, what's going on? What's happening? What is this? What's going on? And he's like, just watch the movie. Okay, 10 minutes later. David, what's happening? What's going on? What's up with this dog?
Yeah, but I'd argue that's the effectiveness in the horror, and that is in both Night and Thing, is that she will say, well, why don't they just do this? Or, why don't you just, or here's my favorite part, I think it was I think maybe 40 or 30 minutes left in the Thing, and she goes, why don't they just burn the place down?
I was yelling these pendejos, why the hell don't they just burn it down? And David's like, they will die, right? I'm like, oh. But still, they can just go away and they'll keep warm from the fire. I don't care.
And the thing is, I also want to get this quickly mentioned, is that we talked about how that Phil not only has written the book for Resident Evil, but he also writes for his blog called Noiseless Chatter. Mm-hmm. And in particular, he and this is actually, I can tell you this, Phil, that this was an inspiration for the SOSN podcast. Originally comparing something old to something newer or newish, mm-hmm. and how you, I think you referred to it as your trilogy of terror, where you would take 3 movies and you would compare the 3, and maybe not so much scary movies, like you would compare, like the Muppet movie, The Great Muppet Caper, and Muppets Take Manhattan. But one of my favorite bits was when you reviewed John Carpenter's apocalyptic trilogy, and The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness. Mm. Which is just, I highly recommend all 3 movies, especially The Thing, which is just a masterpiece. But it's funny because when The Thing came out, it's also kind of matched the Resident Evil in the sense of critical acclaim. I mean, The Thing probably even more so in regards to being very mixed. I guess audiences weren't ready for Resident Evil quite yet. Same for The Thing. But then suddenly, a year or 2 later, holy shit, they become the most influential in terms of horror.
And why do you think is that? That it took a while for people to really have a love for whether these games or these movies?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think you guys are correct on both counts. We can just kind of shrug and say, oh, they were ahead of their time. And there's truth to that, but that clearly doesn't tell the whole story. I think it's kind of going back to what I said earlier about the fixed camera angles. I think it's because people don't really know what they like. They think they do. Mm. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to bring in The Simpsons here. So the Poochie episode,
yes.
Where Poochie is brought about because everybody gets to say exactly what they want this show to be, and everything gets put in there, and nobody likes it. And that's a joke, but there's also a lot of truth to that. God, I'm sure you could list 50 films off the top of your head that were workshopped to death, that probably had a lot of potential, but because they had to make sure Grandma and Junior would both like it, nobody likes it. And I wonder if it's something like that, where The Thing, it came out in my lifetime, but I was too young to really be aware of it. I wonder if The Thing came out and people read about it or saw a trailer or something and thought, okay, that's probably not my thing. And they waited for something that seemed like it was more their thing, and maybe it was, but something that wasn't as good and didn't have the staying power. So yeah, I really don't know. In both cases, I'm very glad that they had a sort of critical reappraisal or cultural reappraisal at least. But I don't know. I think it's just that kind of thing. You look at it and say, I don't really know if this is for me. It is, but you're not giving it a chance.
I wonder if it has to do with, at least with the movies, the ending. Because, I mean, they weren't exactly happy endings. You know what I mean? It's not like... There was no survivors, man. Like, not to spoil it. Dude, okay, here's someone who suffers from, like, anxiety. Like, really bad anxiety and depression. Like, I'm just watching this shit and, like, what the fuck, David? Why'd you show me this? The dude died. And then with The Thing, like, me and David were... I don't want to say was debating about it, but I was like, so was he the monster? Like, so they're both, they're going to die, right? They're dying. Like, that they're just sentenced to death, right? Yeah. And it's like, this isn't a happy ending. They're not going to get saved. And even then, after all that happened, we don't know if the monster actually died. He could be one of them. Like, what the fuck? I was so mad. I wonder if that's probably has to do with that. Because, like, at the end of the day, we want, like, because one of the 9 elements when you were talking about survival horror was about severe penalty for failure. Oh, yes. And I wonder if that's something that people, I guess subconsciously or maybe consciously, don't want to see. Like, they want to see the happy ending. Like, we have so much shit going on in our lives that, like, to see it on the screen, we're like, well, damn it. Yeah. even the movies are telling us we're gonna die. Yeah. So you know what I mean? Yeah, that it's like, not everything can end like Day of the Dead of let's all get in a helicopter and go to the Caribbean or the Bahamas, and then but at least by that point, because it was originally supposed to be a Dead trilogy, that at this point he's like, let them go to that happy, tropical island, those 3,
Oh sure, yeah, and specifically to Day of the Dead, I'm fully in support of that ending, and I'm in support of that ending because of the previous 2 endings, Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. Night of the Living Dead clearly did not have a happy ending. Dawn of the Dead almost certainly did not have a happy ending. I kind of think by that point, the 3rd iteration of this story, I'm willing to give it a happy ending. If Night of the Living Dead had a happy ending, I can't even imagine what that would have looked like. But if it had one, I don't think it would have had that impact. I do think that's part of it. Somebody probably went to see The Thing when it came out, and his friends said, hey, how was it? And he says, oh, it was all right. I don't know. At the end, I don't know if everyone died or what. And, that's not really... It's not a feel-good movie. It's not, I laughed all the way through. It's not something that you can sum up in a sentence that'll make someone else want to see it. And so probably people didn't see it.
It also didn't help the fact, and this is not a joke, it either released on the same weekend or a weekend before or after E.T. So it's like, do you want to watch your alien movie where he's nice and friendly, or do you want to watch your alien movie where he's going to kill you and make a copy of you, and then kill your family,
kill humanity,
kill off everything on the face of the planet within just as to quote Phil, shy of 3 years. And it's
I didn't know that. I believe you. It's kind of breaking my brain a little bit here. But I believe that that's true. I had no idea. I think, yes, that probably... God, when there were like 2 movies that came out almost back-to-back about volcanoes, and 2 movies that came out almost back-to-back about meteors. And that sort of thing happens, and you always have... Maybe they both kind of suck, of course, but you always have one that rose above the other one. And if people had any desire to see an alien film, and E.T. and The Thing came out, there's no question that the buzz around E.T. would have been far more positive.
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
God, for any number of reasons.
It's kind of funny because like there was a chapter in your book, and it's a really good chapter. Like if people don't care about video games, I still recommend your book just even for this chapter alone. When you were talking to, and I'm gonna probably mess up her name again, Margie Kerr. She's a sociologist. Oh my God, I can't talk. Who wrote Scream: Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear. I thought it was very interesting how you guys would talk about the mental response to fear and panic. So it's like, I wonder if also that goes into it. Just people are like, I don't want to pay to get scared. I want to have the controlled fear, and I don't know what's going to happen going into this movie. So why the hell would I bother? I'd rather watch E.T. and Drew Barrymore. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it, you know?
And the same thing applying, of course, to Resident Evil. That there are people who, like, I don't want to play that game. I want to play, Super Mario Bros. I'll give you one example as I'm getting older as a gamer, that I'm finding myself, like, I don't want to play the games like the Call of Duties or the Grand Theft Autos, that I'm leaning more towards, Super Mario Brothers and such, because I guess in my line of thinking is I'd rather play a game where I'm experiencing things through a fanciful lens in regards to what's going on in the real world. Mm-hmm. I still watch horror movies, but, video games, I'm leaning more towards that aspect of it.
Yeah, I really do love how you guys did dive into like the whole like fear of like flight or fight type of thing, and how this video game does trigger that, and how it pretty much does have to teach you to kind of go against your instincts if you are someone who naturally just runs away. It teaches you to like be,
which I am,
right? Boy, I'm right there with you. Don't worry. Whether that, I'm gonna punch you right in the face. One of the two. Like I never know. But like this video game, you said like it pretty much sounds like it taught you how to learn when you had to run, when you had to fight. So it's like, and then learning the psychology behind that. It was very interesting. Like, what was like something interesting that you learned when speaking with her about it?
Yeah, it was honestly, it was specifically that. I did go into our conversation having, a number of specific questions, but a lot of what we discussed just came out of the conversation naturally. And one of those things was the fact that I still remember vividly a zombie creeps around the corner, and I don't know how to shoot. I knew how to shoot 30 seconds ago, and now I need to shoot, and I don't know how to do it. Yeah. And I forget where the door is to get out of this room. Like, everything has just drained from my mind in this moment of fear. And that came up in the conversation, and that was so fascinating to me that, like, yes, I mean, we can chuckle and say, oh, you're a scaredy cat, and that there's fun in that, of course, ribbing your friends. Mm-hmm. But physiologically, that happens. And then that connected in my mind to all these things, like, Night of the Living Dead, when they're getting the gas, and Ben puts down the torch, and then they go to fill up the tank, and the gas hits the torch. And, it was a number of really dumb decisions that got them there, but they aren't dumb people. It's the moment. It's the fear. They're focused on one thing, so they ignore the other, or they lose track of the other. And it's so fascinating to me that we can watch these movies and we can say, why did that idiot go into the basement? There's no escape. Why did that person, run down a blind alley? Like, but the reason is we probably would have as well. Because our critical faculties are done. All we're doing is we're saying we need to move, and we don't really take into account the fact that we're moving into a trap.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you can actually go all the way back to the Stone Age when Oog went down to the river and he got attacked by that gigantic cat with razor sharp teeth. So then Og tells the rest of the cavemen, hey, don't go there because Oog got murdered. Yeah. I guess in the
but there's that one idiot that'll go like, where? Let me go check it out. But I don't know. I know for a fact I would be one of the first people to die in a real like horror situation.
Well, I don't know. I think you'd be the master of the lockpick.
Master of the lockpick.
Speaking of which, and that is the thing is like we go into camp, and that is the thing about Resident Evil and how influential it is in horror, and also. Because we watched recently Gods and Monsters, and there's a couple scenes in it where you see James Whale and his maid. They're watching Bride of Frankenstein eating milk and cookies, while at the bar, Brendan Fraser is watching the same movie as well, and everybody's yucking it up. He intentionally did it that way. In the case of Resident Evil, that's not I don't think that's intentional. about it's literally like these English speaking actors giving these lines of dialogue by Japanese game developers, and in the loss in translation, well, you get classic dialogue, but
Yeah, that was okay. When I was reading your book and I was reading into that, and this is actually perfect because I wanted to segue into this part of the book. You got a really great chance to talk to a lot of the people who worked on the video game. So you tracked down a lot of people, and I'm sure what was the most interesting thing that you learned about the making of the game while talking to the the voiceover actors, as well as the actors who played the beginning sequences of the video game?
Oh God, a few things. I'd probably have a different answer depending on which set of actors. So for the voice actors, the thing that really blew me away is that in this case it was Ward Sexton, the guy who ended up narrating the game.
Mm-hmm.
He, an English speaker, looked at this script and said, "This is bad. This is bad writing." And you can get Cary Grant in here and tell him to record these lines, and it's going to sound awful because nobody speaks like this. And they said, "That's fine. We don't care. Just do it." That was kind of surprising to me that I don't know. I would love to look back and think, okay, what happened here is no one realized this was bad. And that's not the case. Someone did actually speak up and say, "Please don't do this." And they did it anyway. The live actors, the one thing that blew me away is the fact that none of them knew they were in this game. That's astounding to me.
Yeah,
Until,
I never thought of that.
It's nuts. A few years ago, I think Charlie Kraslovsky, who played Chris, was probably the first one chronologically to realize he was in this game. And, the dominoes started falling after that. But it's just so bizarre to me that these people, I think they were all native English speakers. They lived in Japan, and they got, here's $50 to come out to a field and pretend you're shooting at dogs. And they do it, and then they go home, and they cash their check. And they don't realize that, the thing they were a part of has had a serious cultural impact. And they don't realize it because they weren't actually part of the creative process at all. They were paid to put on a costume.
Yeah, and the thing is what's also touching about it in the book is just the level of dedication that the fans have to Resident Evil. Because in the book, you stated, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the credits list for the game, they don't list the entire name of the actors.
Just their first name,
just
right?
the first name. And it's just astonishing that it's like they had to do the research, these fans, to figure out who is who and who is that, who is this Barry. And I hope, and this is my favorite of the people that you've interviewed, and I hope I pronounced his last name correctly, Barry Gajerd? Gajard?
Yes, Barry Jerd.
Barry Jerd, who voices the infamous character of Barry, who, what I love about whenever you write about him and when he speaks, is that I get this sense of pride he has in his work as a voiceover artist, that he's done so many of it. He knows his worth, and he knows how good he can be. And then his embarrassment in recording it and hearing it afterwards.
Yeah.
It's I wonder, you experience it. All people, if they know who he is, hey, you're Barry. I mean, there's a part it's like, hey, I'm glad that you recognize me, but another part it's like, but couldn't you recognize me for this instead?
I know. Of course, I'm glad you like anything about the book, but that specific part, I'm really glad you like that, because I'm not trying to put it on a pedestal or anything, but I kind of think that was Barry, the real Barry. I think that was kind of his chance to not be the video game Barry for a little bit. He, as you read in the book, and as you may have already known, he's been mocked relentlessly for decades because of that performance, to the point that he deleted his website, he retired from being online. Mm-hmm. I wasn't even sure if the guy was still alive. And what ended up happening, I won't say who, but someone else I interviewed for the book said that they knew Barry personally as a friend. And they hadn't seen him in a while, but they know him, they're on good terms. And I said, would you mind, because I just interviewed you and you see this isn't a hit piece, I'm not here to bully you and make fun of you, would you mind letting him know that this is what I'm doing? And that person did exactly that. And then Barry reached out to me. He was afraid. I think that he's already in a sense been immortalized as a boob. And I think he was afraid that, here's just a book that's going to further cement me as being really bad at my job. I hope it came across this way, but it was certainly intended to be as far from that as possible.
No, yeah, you did. Honestly, I did feel that you gave justice to all the people that did work, like whether voiceover or in acting. Like it did really feel like you gave them justice in the sense that it's like whether how they felt about it or they. It was a job for them, you know. It's like for some of them, like you correct me if I'm wrong. Like they're like, oh, it was a job. I did it, and then I just forgot about it. And then with Sex and he's like, well, I remember how bad the writing was, and I fought really hard for it to like be changed, but no. And they're very prideful of their work, but then also just realizing that how much of an impact culturally that this game had, and they weren't a part of it. Like they missed out on something at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like kind of giving them their moment as well. That's like, yeah, you were made fun of, but also just there is another side to this that you are important. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like it was very beautifully written, honestly.
Yeah,
Phil.
it actually reminds me of the approach that Tim Burton took to making Ed Wood, because I know that the original assessment was, oh, they're going to be making fun of Ed Wood all the time. It was like, no, it's like they acknowledge that yes, he was a bad filmmaker, but it's his enthusiasm into it. It's the fact that he wanted.
He's more than just that.
Yeah, that you want.
Yeah.
And it's also, if you think about it, it's like you think about your favorite actors and actresses and such throughout the years, and that is, do you really want to go and punish the person for that one role? And like for example, I was on a string of Inside the Actors Studio marathons, and Charlize Theron, her breakout in America was doing a Children of the Corn movie, and then I had to watch one with Naomi Watts, and her role was in a Children of the Corn movie. It's like, and not just the original, we're talking like one of the many sequels. It's like, do we like, well, you did Mulholland Drive and you won an Oscar for Monster, but hey, this role in Children of the Corn, shame on you. But it's not like that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because in a case like that, Naomi Watts or somebody, they have these humble beginnings, or they have a few roles that they're probably not too proud of. I shouldn't say Naomi Watts because I have no clue. Maybe she's very proud of her Children of the Corn work. But assuming somebody isn't, but then they later get recognized, or they have some kind of role that overshadows that, then that's a little better for them. I think a little healthier for their career. It's something that, Conan could show a clip of and the audience chuckles, but then we go back to what we're actually promoting. Whereas somebody like Barry, this is it. Like, this has overshadowed everything. And I don't know if you have, feel free if you haven't, but if you look up his voice work and other things, he's fully competent. If the script is bad, then the script is bad. And if the script is fine, then he's pretty darn good, actually. But nobody is ever going to see that. So it's not, here's Barry Churd and all the things that he did. And now let's laugh a little bit that he started off in Resident Evil and back to the subject at hand. For him, like that ends up being the subject no matter how much he wants to pull it away. Yeah. And I don't know, there's something tragic about that to me.
Yeah, and the thing is, just thinking about it in regards to the game itself, and yes, because we were watching the playthrough, and by the way, the sequence with the dogs jumping through the glass, even for a game with the blocky pixelated graphics, it still had
jumped.
Yep, she jumped at that.
Yeah.
But
like, hijo de tu puta madre, cabrones, man, it scared me.
But there's a portion in the book where you talk about how you went to a live riff tracks of the boys watching Night of the Living Dead, and they're yucking it up, haha, and of course the aforementioned moment where Ben is shot and the entire audience goes silent, and it's like we're all yucking it up, like, oh, the master of the key lock, blah blah blah, these other really goofy lines, but then suddenly, bam, here are the dogs to scare the bejesus out of you. And it's like how effective that is.
It's amazing that, I don't know, horror has this ability, and I'm sure I can't unravel it. I cannot give you the reason this works. I can only tell you that it does. Horror has this ability that, like, when it's good, it negates whatever's bad around it. Night of the Living Dead or The Thing. Actually, I'll do The Thing on this one, where I think almost all of the effects in that movie are really good, and they still hold up.
Yes.
And then there's a few that maybe aren't, and that's fine. You notice the few that aren't, but when one is, when something actually scares you, when Wilford Brimley comes around the corner when you don't expect him, like,
yes,
you don't care. You don't think, okay, well, I noticed that other thing was styrofoam and they lingered on it too long. That's not in your mind. The moment the horror starts to work, everything else just goes right into the shadows.
Yeah.
Exactly. I couldn't put it better myself.
Honestly, now thinking about it, because I don't remember the parts where I thought of like something that that didn't work. I don't remember any of those parts. I only think of the parts that actually made me jump, and I was fucking terrified.
Yeah, you're thinking of the literally the gut punch in the movie, which one of my other favorite parts in the book you talk about is, or in your article for The Thing rather, where when you rewatch it, it's like when is the moment when when things will go south, or like when does that person become a thing, and it's like. You study that for Resident Evil, Night of the Living Dead, The Thing. For you, what is that moment in Resident Evil when you played that game where you're like, that's the gut punch. That's the moment when we're not in Kansas anymore. I am terrified.
God, it's so funny because we had already discussed how there's sort of two stories of Resident Evil: the one where you're the protagonist, and the one where you missed the story. Mm-hmm. And I think in either case, the answer is going to be different. When it's when it's your story, for me, even though the character doesn't quite realize it, you're going through the house, you're collecting the keys, disarming the traps, doing whatever you can just to make some kind of progress. And there's a scene where whoever your character is, they have to go out to, what do they call it? They call it like a residence house or something, mm-hmm. where the workers stay.
Yes.
You go out there, you solve the puzzles, you come back, and on your way back, you run into Wesker. And he's Wesker, but like he's been gone for the whole game, and he's dodging your questions, and he's being really shady, and then he leaves, and well, why did we split up again? Your character at that time doesn't really have much information about him, and I think even if you don't as a player, like that is where something, the light bulb maybe doesn't go on entirely, but it starts to flicker. There's something here. We know there's monsters. We know we're in some serious trouble. But here's my commanding officer. I thought he was gone. I thought he could be dead. He's here, and now he just walked away from me with no explanation. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the one thing you thought you could probably count on is your teammates, and that is the evidence that you can't. You never could, but that's the moment you realize it, and I think that's the turning point there. And God, in the previous story, it must have been the first corpse that you find. His name is Kenneth, and it must have been when poor Kenneth got bit by the zombie. And the thing that I love, we never see that happen in the game, but we do see it happen in Night of the Living Dead. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because they start out in the cemetery, and what's his name, Johnny?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's goofing around with Barbara. They're coming to get you, Barbara, and he's just being a brother. And there's this guy, and honestly, from their perspective, he's probably a wino. Maybe he has some mental health issues. Like, there's something wrong with this guy. Uh-huh. But their mind is not going to jump to he's a zombie. Because it shouldn't. By no means should we see somebody acting strange and immediately assume they're zombies. So, they get close enough, and obviously hell breaks loose. And I think it's the same thing in Resident Evil. This guy was well-armed. This guy was prepared to deal with something. But when someone lurched toward him, he doesn't know that's a zombie. And so he gets bitten and eventually consumed. But like the moment that his teammates saw that guy get bitten, they must have realized we are in some kind of story we are not prepared for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
those are parts in the book that I actually genuinely did love.
Yeah,
is like I don't really think much. Actually, honestly, before I met David, I didn't really think about the art in the making of storytelling. So it's like it was moments like that when you were talking about in your book that really did make me appreciate like the backstory, how to really think of the backstory and how it adds to the fear of everything. It's like in the very beginning of Resident Evil, in the video game where you run into your first zombie, you see him crouched down eating somebody, and that you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, like you did mention like, well, this poor guy was the first to realize, that there's zombies around. He got killed without realizing. So it's up to us playing the protagonist to learn from their mistake, mm-hmm. So it's just kind of like the art behind that. Like, honestly, your book is so good that it really just get those juices flowing for people who aren't in this industry, who don't really think about stuff like that. This is a really good book to get you really thinking about that, honestly.
Exactly. And there's one thing that I do want to I want to wrap up this interview with, but before I do, I want to thank you, Phil, so much for taking time out of your day to talk with us.
You.
It's, not just because,
God, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Not just because of the book itself, but because of your blog of Noiseless Chatter. And I know I'm a broken record here, but people, please Like, go check out his work. And it's not just for people who are reading it for the Alf stuff or for the love of God. There's somebody who's a brilliant mind in terms of providing a honest, truthful account of these movies and opinions of them, and relatable. I really love the work there. But we're at the time of this recording. It's during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the thing is, what's brilliant about genre filmmaking, not just horror but fantasy and science fiction, is how you can have something like Night of the Living Dead is going to be 52 in October. The Thing is going to turn 38 in this summer, if memory serves. That we're dealing with COVID-19, and it's just interesting how it is when Night of the Living Dead, where it's like, don't go outside, and if you go out there and watch the news bulletins to get further information of what to do, or in The Thing, who is an imitation, who is one of the things, like in regards to COVID-19, who has it,
who's contagious, who's infected,
and it's just like how you show that, or in display in regards to all those pieces of artwork and such. I mean, just if you could elaborate just a little bit more in regards to that, how impactful genre filmmaking, genre video games can have on people, on society.
Yeah, certainly. God, there's so much that I want to say in response to this. This is not an observation of mine, but when the coronavirus sort of started hitting the news in a big way, I did see a lot of people circulating Resident Evil memes and stuff, and they call it the C virus instead of the T virus. And but that I do think that it's going to sound so silly, but I mean it sincerely. Maybe I'm just sincerely silly, but like pop culture like this, even the stuff that doesn't quite work, it helps us to understand real things. And and like to some extent, like you have Ben being black and the grouchy 50s white guys trying to wrestle back power from him and all that. Like, okay, so we can see that there's some kind of race issue at play here. But did that mean that Romero foresaw COVID-19? No, of course not. It's just that he illustrated something, and he built the world around it so well that we are able to find echoes in other ways. As the world moves on, I wish this were true, but as the world moves on from like that kind of knee-jerk racism, we can still find things to sort of like worry us and to relate to here. But the reason I cannot believe that you brought this up, because I just watched The Thing again before this interview. I had never noticed it before, but in the background, it's basically a one location film. But I think it's the rec room where they're doing the blood test. Behind McCready on the wall, there's it was like some kind of war propaganda poster. Yes. I noticed it, never really read it. This time around, I read it. And it says, it's got a picture of a bombshell. It's a woman in a revealing outfit. And the text above her says something to the effect of, "They don't come with labels." And on her, there is a label, and it says, "I have VD." And it's like this, it's this really interesting sort of, I don't know, like, I don't even want to call it a background joke. It's just sort of a way of layering in the reality that you don't know who's the thing. You don't know who is COVID-19. You don't know who is VD. Like, it's a matter of encouraging you to take some kind of, I don't know, to take some kind of personal responsibility. But at the same time, the answer can't be assume everyone has VD, assume everyone is the thing, because we see what happens when you go down that route. Nobody trusts anybody, and we're all very tired. So I don't know. I think it brings up the question, and I think it's okay that it doesn't give the definitive answer. I think it would probably be a really bad idea to give a definitive answer, but it raises the question, and then it at least gets you thinking.
Yeah, and the thing is that the thing is, in regards to not just this conversation, and not just regards to your Noiseless Chatter posts, and not just in regards to the book, that you just continually show that your work is worth listening to, your work is worth reading, because as I said, you were able to dissect that and put it in such a relatable way,
Yeah, I actually did want to ask you, like, how you ended your book, actually. I did want to ask about why you chose to end it that way, because you did get very personal, and you do talk about your mental health issues and you know, you leaving your home and kind of the atmosphere that you were at and stuff like that. Can I ask you, why was that? Why did you make that choice to end the book this way? Or like, can you go a little bit more into your thought process on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's the strange thing about that is that that's probably the one chapter that it was completely natural. It just sort of grew out of what I was already writing. In the other chapters, I would sit down and I would say, okay, I want to write about X. What can I say about X? How can I present it? And overall, I think it came out really well. That final chapter just sort of happened. I had finished talking about the game. I needed to end the book, and without really even thinking about it, I just wrote. And that's okay. Sometimes I do that for my drafts anyway, and I go back and I fix them up. I just wrote that one and came back to it, and I thought, okay, this is actually pretty good. I'll submit it, and I did, and I got all the feedback from the editors and the proofreaders and things to adjust, and that's fine. They didn't touch the final chapter. So I was going through it for, my next iteration of the complete book, and I made all the changes I was going to make, and I got to the final chapter, and again, they hadn't touched it, so I thought, well, did they not like it? Did they not care about it? I'm going to meddle with it. I'm going to add all this stuff to it, and I submitted it, and I got a message back from one of the editors, and he was very polite, but the tone of it was basically, why did you screw with that? Like this was something that worked, and I don't understand why you meddled with it. So we actually went right back to the original version, and that's exactly what you've got. They probably fixed some typos, but beyond that, that's exactly what you've got. It was the most natural part of the book, so I'd love to say, here's why I did it, I'm a storyteller, and that's the ending I built to. The fact of the matter is, the ending just came because the story was complete.
Yeah, I did find it was very beautiful, and obviously, like, from an artistic point of view, how you were able to bring the video game to, like, I guess, kind of mirror certain parts of your life and how you were able to survive, quote unquote survive, you know what I mean? So it's like, I did find it very beautiful that you wrote that. It did tie in everything great. So I'm actually very glad that they told you, don't fuck with it, leave it.
I am too.
Yeah. So like, but I was very interested when you wrote it, because I was wondering, like, one, I am glad that you did. Like, I can't imagine this book. I mean, I would think the book by itself, it's still a great book, but just you adding your own personal elements to it, and then the story at the end, I thought it just brought everything beautifully together. But I just wanted to mention it. I genuinely do love your book.
Yeah, let's just say at the end of this story that he does get in a helicopter and go to the Caribbean. It is.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I don't know. Maybe the Day of the Dead sort of ending, where like I got out, and then the credits rolled, and you can decide what happened then. But yeah, I don't know. I live to tell the tale, so I guess it is more Day of the Dead.
Yeah. So Phil, tell our audience, when it comes to this book about Resident Evil, like, how can they pick it up? When can they pick it up?
Excellent question. Obviously, I don't know the day on which this will be released, but I assume by the time it is, the Kickstarter for Boss Fight Books Season 5 will still be going. As of now, which is May 10th, I think we've hit about 450% funding, which is insane.
Excellent.
But that does mean it's nuts. But that does mean it is happening. So there's no question about that. If you go to the Kickstarter, you can just pledge and say this is the book you want, and you'll get it. Or you can get all of the books. There's one on Majora's Mask, Silent Hill 2, Red Dead Redemption, and Final Fantasy VI. So you can do that. If you're listening to this in August of 2020 or any time after, it should just be available through Amazon, bossfightbooks.com. I'm sure I'll have some on my website, noiselesschatter.com. I'll sign them and ship them that way. But pretty much anywhere books are sold after August, you can get it. Before that, just pledge to the Kickstarter.
Excellent, Phil. And like I said, we're really happy. We're really proud of you, because this is a really good read, and we highly recommend everyone go to Noiseless Chatter, pick up the book. It's worth your time.
I do hope, Phil, that you are, in works of writing another book. Just saying.
I hate to disappoint you. I have ideas. To be totally honest, this was a fantastic experience, 100% positive experience, but it was also kind of draining. And for the first time in like years, I am just enjoying not writing something.
Oh,
but
okay.
I do have ideas. Something will follow.
Hey, excellent. And I know we can't wait. Whatever it is, I know it's going to be brilliant.
It sounds like we're
Thank you.
sucking up to him.
Yeah.
Don't forget about us, Phil, when you become famous.
And I'd like to thank these two schmucks who give us interview.
Wait, who are you calling a schmuck? Me?
Well,
Andale, cabrón. Try. Call me a schmuck one more time. Do it.
all right. So, but anyways, folks, thank you for listening. Like, check out Philip Reed's chat. Check out his
She really
blog.
threw you off, didn't she?
Oh, dude. Well, maybe. But
Hey.
well, I love her. Mwah.
You better.
But yeah, check out Philip Reed. It's Noiseless Chatter, and to pick up his copy Resident Evil should be released around the time of August 2020.
Yes, definitely check out the Kickstarter if you want to pledge, and please go follow him on Instagram, all that fun stuff.
Yes, where can we follow you on Instagram, Twitter? What's your handle?
Oh, for crying out loud! I don't know.
Well, never mind.
Yeah. Well, Facebook is just Noiseless Chatter. You can find the fan page. Twitter is No Noise Chit Chat because Noiseless Chatter was too long. I am on Instagram. I could not tell you what my account is there. Put in Noiseless Chatter.
I think it is Noiseless Chatter. I think I do follow.
Okay.
Instagram. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can also give us a follow on Instagram and Twitter. We're at SOSN podcast. You can also follow us on Podbean and YouTube as well,
And Spotify. Don't forget
and
about
Spotify. And can't forget about Spotify. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, this is David,
And this is Salome.
and thank you all for
And Phil.
listening. And Phil,
And me.
and you, and you, and what is it, like the end of the Great Muppet Caper? And me, and me, and me, and me. Like, have a nice day, everyone, and keep safe.
Bye.
Bye.